Hello and welcome to this edition of Profiles on Pasco. I'm Tambry Lane, Public Information Officer with Pasco County Government, and today we're talking about the Pasco County Animal Hoarding Task Force. So joining us are some special guests. We have Mike Shoemate and Danielle Downs. First of all, thank you both for being here. We appreciate it. Thank you. I wanted you to talk about your role with Animal Services a little bit. Mike, we'll start with you.
Okay. I'm the Director of Animal Services. I oversee everything that the county has to do as far as operating a shelter, animal control services. We do adoptions at the shelter. We have quite a vast array of services that we provide to the county in that regard. We also do animal licensing for the county. The animal control aspect, you know, they're the folks that are out in the street every day answering citizens' calls or complaints about loose animals, if there's any kind of disturbance in the neighborhood as far as an aggressive dog or anything, we go after that. We investigate cruelty cases as well. And of course, hoarding is a big part of that. We're finding more and more of those cases out in our community, and it's very important that we can handle them effectively. So,
Danielle, tell us a little about your role with Animal Services.
Right. So I'm an animal control officer for Pasco County, and my daily operations are answering and servicing the citizens while out in the field for Pasco. That could be anything from picking up an injured animal that may have just been hit by a car, somebody who found a loose stray running in the neighborhood, but then we also do cruelty, humane investigations. We assist our fellow law enforcement agencies, anything from other municipalities to Pasco Sheriff's Department as well. And there's a whole plethora of different types of cases that we can run on a daily basis.
I can imagine. Mm-hmm. All right, and today we're focusing on the Animal Hoarding Task Force. So Mike, give us a little bit of the history of this task force and how it came about.
we started this probably about 4 years ago. We had a brief history of cases probably in the county that led us to realize that we were not prepared for what we found on scene. And so we started looking around to develop a task force. We actually saw Lee County had one in place. So a contingent of the folks from Pasco went down, got all the notes, saw the presentation on their task force, very impressed with it, came back and tried to duplicate it as much as possible to get those agencies we needed to assist us with developing our own task force. And so we began to do that, and at first it was just a few agencies within the county, and then we started reaching out to other agencies that could help us out, especially in regards to the human element. We weren't really that well prepared for that, so we needed some professionals to come in to help us case management and things like that with folks.
And why do you think there's a need for this specific task force in Pasco County?
Well, we run into situations almost every day, it seems like, that could lead into a hoarding situation. A lot of times it's neighbors that will complain. It's family members that will identify someone in their family that's been left alone and they've gotten into a situation where they're starting to hoard different things. Typically it's either resources or it's animals, and for us that's the big aspect, is the animals. Normally we'll find out through code enforcement. They're good partners with us in this, and then also we'll just get complaints from customer service, calls in from folks that have gone by their neighbor's house and they've seen the condition start to change and they're concerned, so they'll call it in.
So the task force has been around for a few years. You just added an investigator. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, absolutely. We knew that a lot of hoarding, it really borders on neglect of those animals, and sometimes that neglect is so severe it runs into cruelty. We want to protect those animals, but we also want to look at the human element as well, but still we have to enforce laws and ordinances within our county and protect those animals. So we wanted to do a better job of defining that line between hoarding and cruelty. And sometimes we come out to a case and we immediately know that this is an overwhelmed caregiver or something, so we won't need as much investigation as that because of the condition of the animals aren't as bad. But when the condition is, we want to investigate as fully as we can. So what we had asked for this for quite a while. Finally, we had some money available in our budget, and we decided to train one of our own to go ahead and take the courses. that were necessary. She went to the University of Missouri, got the Hoarding, not Hoarding, I'm sorry, the Humane Investigator certification. This took a while, but over the course of a year and a half, she completed it. We're very proud of her, and so now she's actually gone on to a few cases, and luckily we also had the ASPCA. We got a grant with them. They're a good partner in this. They do a lot of hoarding nationally, so they've got grants available, and we were able to get her some extra forensic training as well.
So those are important skills that she brings to the table.
Absolutely, absolutely. And she can use that not only with our agency, but with other agencies as well.
Oh, okay. Danielle, I wanted to ask you, Mike touched on this a little bit, but in your day-to-day operations, how do you find out about these hoarding cases?
Our day-to-day operations could be anything from, like Mike said, it could be customer service calling in to where somebody finally has the courage to reach out and not feel bad for reporting it. Oftentimes we have people who are aware that this situation is going on with either a family member, a friend, or a fellow neighbor. And it takes a lot of courage for that person to reach out to us through the phone. We have website submissions that they can go through Pasco County's website. But then even something as simple as me driving through a neighborhood while I'm servicing, a separate case. I might have somebody approach my vehicle and, just privately say, hey, I think this is going on. Is this something that you could look into? It really comes in all facets as far as the information. So, we have to take each bit of information seriously and, assess it as best as possible so that we know what we're looking into. Because, like Mike touched on, it could be anything from materials that somebody's hoarding, but then you don't see the one room inside the house to where there's animals that have just been collected and are suffering and they're in need, and it's oftentimes to where you start to smell it. So It could just be the change of the season and the wind catches the right direction and it makes somebody call.
When we were talking earlier, something I found really interesting is how you pointed out that each case is so individual. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about that, maybe some of the specific cases.
Absolutely, yeah. So we've had, as far as 2016, we've had, I would like to say, what's a pretty successful year. We've had about 18 cases. We ended up impounding about 544 animals from those separate cases. That could be anything to an extremely overwhelmed caregiver. It could be somebody who just lost control of maybe bringing in a stray cat, didn't know she was pregnant, and then they allowed the inbreeding to just occur inside the home. But then it could also be somebody who is honestly taking very good care of the animals, but they become the caretaker of the neighborhood and they bring in all the strays, and strays get dropped off in front of their property. So a couple of our most recent cases usually typically involve cats. We do have cases to where we've worked with a lot of dogs. We've had birds, all kinds of animals come in, but the cats seem to overwhelm a lot of our residents because it is so easy. They can produce a litter every 62 to 65 days. So if you imagine the amount of kittens that can come out of that litter, and everybody's heartstrings are pulled. So specifically, the one that I wanted to touch on was a woman who devoted her life to rescuing, saving animals. She was a certified groomer. She opened up her own boarding facility, and this was 40 years ago, she said. 40 years ago, she put her heart and her savings into a facility. It's where she lived. And unfortunately, she was in her 80s when the call came through to us. And we worked with her for an extended period of time, ultimately finding out that her age kind of got the best of her. And what the most difficult part was relaying that, it's okay that you love the animals, it's okay that you provide food and water to them every day, but oftentimes it's not enough. Oftentimes it's taking the courage to step out and say, I'm overwhelmed, and my love and my passion for this animal is not really truly giving it what it needs. She had roaches that were feeding off of everything in her facility. I saw them crawling on her, crawling throughout her clothing. The cat food and the dog food was pitted from the amount of roaches that were feeding from their food, so the animals couldn't really get the nutrition they needed. We had a dog that was completely infested with ticks, and she had flea and tick medicine inside her facility. It's different every single time, so you have to be able to truly morph into the human needs as well as the animal needs, because if you don't have a good relationship with that person, reaching out and helping those animals is is going to be extremely difficult.
Yeah, we talk a lot about these cases and some of the things you have to see and some of the things you deal with, but in most cases, do you think it's safe to say that these start from a place of empathy, of people caring about the animals and wanting to do what's right?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, a lot of the hoarding is, like Danielle mentioned, it's the overwhelmed caregiver. It's the person that starts out with a legitimate purpose serving these animals. For example, we've had cases in the county where a couple bred animals legally, professionally. They were very good at it, but as time went by, one of them got sick, passed away, left the other one alone with the animals, and before you know it, you just don't know how much breeding's going on, how much the situation has changed, and it's really devastating for these folks. We've had people, when we show up at their door because of a complaint, just say, "Thank God you're here." Because they really realized at that point that I just can't handle this anymore. And you go in and you see the devastation of their home, the condition of the animals. So it is kind of overwhelming for a lot of folks. But they do have good intentions when they start out, I think. It's even like the rescue organization that just gets overwhelmed and they can't stop. They think they have to save everything, but they won't give anything back. They won't adopt them out. And so it's pretty tragic sometimes.
And I know it's about enforcement, but it also is about that human element. I want to touch back on that a little bit because I was really struck by that in conversations with everyone at Animal Services. You guys really care about not just the animals, but the people involved.
Absolutely. Yeah, we often say that, we've been fortunate enough to actually go to some seminars and conferences just to obtain more information about the human aspect, because they do categorize hoarding into 4 different, types, anything from an exploiter to a rescuer. So it's really, the psychological aspect of that is the biggest part. At the end of the day, if the human is the one who is causing the animals to, if they're not really helping the animals the way that they need, you have to break through to that person in order to really get through to the animals that they own. Because we can't just go in there and everybody thinks we can just scoop them up and save them all. But the relapse rate of somebody who truly is affected mentally and physically by hoarding is almost a 100% rate of relapse.
I was really surprised by that recidivism rate. You see it all the time.
We do, yeah, and part of our task force now is just recently, as of the last week and a half, we just visited one of our hoarders who, she was overwhelmed, and Human Services and a lot of other agencies came together to help her. And I was just out there probably in the fall, and checking up on her, and her home was in good condition. The cats were looking good, but a week and a half ago, new babies, new kittens, the conditions inside were not sanitary for her. So that's a new aspect we're looking into accomplishing with the task force is a successful, check back schedule, so that we can really start pulling in the human needs side of things. We enjoy working with the humans, but we recognize that there's a fine line. We're Animal Services, so we really need to bridge any other gaps that might be out there with other agencies.
I think that's what really sets you apart too, because you're going to hate this because you've mentioned that you don't like being called a dog catcher.
No.
Because it's so much more than that, and I think that's an outdated term. But your involvement with the people involved in these cases, do you think that helps when you have to go back and visit these people again, and if so, how?
Absolutely. That is how I operate on a day-to-day basis, is because even if it's not a hoarder, even if somebody ends up seeing my face because their dog was running loose in the neighborhood, my goal is always to leave that person with a good rapport. And oftentimes in our hoarding situations, we still do issue citations. So as far as the dog catcher aspect and the stigma of being stereotyped as one. I prefer animal cop if I'm going to be labeled. And the reason is because, it's not just about scooping up the strays so that we can, everybody thinks we're going to just put down every animal. it's so much more nowadays. You know, the county shelter and animal services, we're here because a lot of other facilities are overwhelmed. We're here when no one else will open their door to you. We're here when you have lost all faith and you just can't care for yourself or your animals. You don't have to be afraid of us. So the dog catcher stereotype we all picture, you know, with the net, the cartoons, it's not an image that I really want to promote. I want people to see our faces and know that even if I do issue you a citation, we're still going to help you and provide every bit of information, you know, regarding the courts, your arraignment dates, anything like that. We're not just going to throw tickets at you and leave you with an empty home feeling completely void of everything you cared for.
Love what you're doing. Mike, there's a lot of other agencies involved. You talked about that a little earlier. Who all gets involved in the task force?
Well, within the county, we have several agencies or divisions and departments that help us out. Like I said, we partner a lot with code enforcement because typically we're getting the calls to go out for complaints. And so we're serving the citizens that way. And one of those agencies will typically come upon a situation that's either resource hoarding or animal hoarding. But we also pull in other agencies as well. Fire rescue helps us out. We've got the Pasco County Sheriff's Office that helps us. We've actually had cases where we work very closely with them because, you know, we typically do domestic animals and they do livestock, but sometimes there's, you know, you've got those animals like chickens and things like that come into play, and it's a fine line between who's going to take these. So we work with them a lot on that as well. And then we've got the human services with the county. We've also got emergency management. Some of these houses we go into, they've been hoarding, like Daniel talked about, the smell. The ammonia is so strong in there that we have to get it tested before we can actually go in safely with our crews. So that's an important element to have them involved as well. And then we've got customer service, who initially takes all the calls from everyone and talks people and kind of gets more detail for us. And then we've got other agencies outside like CARES, United Way of Pasco. I mean, a lot of these folks, they really bring the resources that help the human element out more than anything else. And then we're starting to branch out a little more so we can grab more of the resources from municipalities as well. And right now we've got Port Richey and Newport Richey on board. We've even reached down to Hillsborough, and they're coming on board with us as well, because there's a lot of crossover between animals and resources that we can use. So.
Well, and you've come a long way in a few short years. In fact, the Board of County Commissioners recently recognized the work you're doing, so I want to give credit where it's due. What was that like?
Thank you. It was great. We had all the agencies actually show up for the resolution, and like Daniel said, we had a really good year last year. We did some excellent work helping some citizens out. We did about 18 cases, and as she said, there was about over 500 animals that were involved. It was pretty significant to do that in a year's time, plus what we always do every day. It's an amazing job. You know, we've got some amazing folks both at the shelter, and they're dedicated, they're hardworking. It's a very emotional business, and you can imagine, you know, we're talking about the human element, the animal element, but you know, at the end of the day, this is people's pets, they love them, and they're our neighbors out there, so we got to take good care of them.
And to be clear, if these animals are able to be rehabilitated, brought back to health, they are adoptable?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, we've got vet staff at the shelter, we've got a behaviorist, we've got a lot of folks at the shelter that really, you know, once the animals get there, they go to work. They immediately start assessing the animals, what are their needs medically or behaviorally, and then we try to get as many adopted as possible.
All right, so one last thing I want to ask you. If there's someone out there who either knows somebody who might be, you know, hoarding animals, or maybe they're in a situation where they're feeling a little overwhelmed, what's your advice for them?
My advice always is, don't be afraid of us. Don't be afraid. Don't worry about retaliation. Don't worry about you know, what's going to happen. Worry about what's going to happen if you don't report it. You know, because these animals don't have a voice, and even though I love animals, we all do love animals, oftentimes the people who are hoarding them, they don't really have a voice either, because I don't think they understand how deep into their situation they are until we show up, and they go through all the stages of accepting what's going on, and to see them come through that and to say thank you is it means everything. It means everything. So just please always remember to reach out and to not be afraid of your county shelter.
Mike, anything you'd like to add?
No, I think she said it well. I think people just don't need to be afraid. You know, that, like you mentioned earlier, that stereotype of the dog catcher. We're out there to serve the people. I think both us and code enforcement over the years, you know, we're looking more compliance. We want to help people. We want to make sure that the situation where they are is safe for them and that their animals are safe. So anytime a family member has a concern, or a neighbor or a friend, just call us. You know, it's nothing to go out and do a welfare check on somebody just to see how they're doing. And sometimes that's all these guys are doing out there. You know, they're going out just to knock on a door and say, hey, is everything okay with you and your animal? We've had some concerns, you know, or we've got a call that someone's concerned about you. So the best thing to do is just call.
Yeah, great advice. Well, thank you, Mike and Danielle, for being here, and thanks for everything you do. It's really made a difference, and we appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks so much.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of Profiles on Pasco. I'm your host, Tambry Lane. We'll see you next time.